Hi, everyone. Welcome to Identity Crisis, a show from the Shalom Hartman Institute creating better conversations about the essential issues facing Jewish life. I'm Yehuda Kurtzer. We're recording this introduction on Thursday, May 14th, 2026. Maybe this is just me getting older and recognizing more of my own limitations, but I find increasingly that in the business of Jewish leadership, the best we can do is try as hard as we can for a long time on behalf of our people. Sometimes we can claim small victories, and sometimes we can move the ball down the field, and that's amidst mistakes we'll inevitably make and the setbacks along the way, often because of circumstances bigger than ourselves that we can't control. But it's hard to ever declare victory. It's especially difficult to declare victory when it comes to fighting hate, the most resilient and creative enemy we face. If you're in that business, you succeed only on the days it doesn't win, and you'll never be able to declare that you've defeated it entirely. History and people are too big and too complicated for any shallow declaration of success. And still, all of that work is noble, and those that labor nobly on behalf of our people, especially those who devote their whole lives to it, those people are to be celebrated despite any failures and mistakes they might make along the way. Abe Foxman passed away this week. Foxman was a titan of Jewish leadership, an indefatigable, bold, opinionated, passionate leader who elevated the standing of the ADL in its quixotic attempt to fight antisemitism for over 3 decades. His legacy was complicated, but I think it's hard to say that he was. He spoke his mind unapologetically, and there's something to that, especially when it comes from sincere people who have clear value systems and who ultimately respect their interlocutors. I was reminded this week, thinking about Abe of blessed memory and the end of an era of Jewish leadership, of a short description of the, quote, Jewish communal establishment that was written by John Wucher, also of blessed memory, back in 2005. Wucher wrote, "The American Jewish civil religion is an institutional ideology that functioned effectively to buttress the position and claims of the polity that sponsored it. It unified Jews across denominational and organizational boundaries. It legitimated the activities of the institutions of the polity itself, and it mobilized Jews to give and to work on behalf of the purposes defined by that polity." There's much more to say there, but Abe Foxman was a true leader in this version of American Jewish civil religion. That religion is weakening, for sure. Some of that weakening is probably to be celebrated, some of it is lamented, and some just is about the passage of time. But Foxman himself, for all of his contributions, I think deserves our gratitude. In his memory, we're re-releasing this week my conversation with him from last year. I found it moving and prophetic at the time. I actually wish more people in charge today would listen to some of his wisdom. May his memory be a blessing. I'm joined today by Abe Foxman, a Jewish leader who is as close to a household name that we have in our national Jewish community. Abe Foxman served as the head of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, for nearly 30 years until he stepped down in 2015. During that time, he grew the organization considerably and positioned the ADL as the kind of chief public information organization nationally on anti-Semitism and as a kind of public arbiter of the Jewish community's views on anti-Semitism. He himself is a child survivor of the Shoah, and his leadership, I found, always reflected both his own personal narrative, but also a broad sense of responsibility for communal and shared concerns. In recent months, he's also become outspoken about the Trump administration, especially most recently on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that stance has set him apart from some other Jewish institutional leaders who have been, let's say, far more circumspect in how they engage with and criticize the president. Thanks for coming on the show today, Abe. And I thought I would start just by asking you to paint a little bit of a picture of what you think has gone wrong in this rise of anti-Semitism. I think, obviously, throughout your tenure at the ADL, you were chronicling and documenting and talking about anti-Semitism as an ever-present force. But it does feel like we're in a different conversation today in 2025 than we were in the 80s and 90s. And what do you think has happened over that period of time that has made this situation become more acute?
Thank you, Yehuda. Well, first I would say that the other thing that guided me and some of us is another phrase that we say every year, B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu b'chalotenu. And that is a deep understanding that anti-Semitism is a yesh. It was, it is, and it will be. that it is a disease without an antidote and without a vaccine. And so in my 30, 50 years, I understood that it was always there. I think all of us, American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, the ADL, what are called the Jewish Defense Agencies, the legacy agencies, the professionals always knew and understood that it's here, that it's deep, that it's serious, that it will always be here. And recognizing that, we tried to develop a strategy of what I would say containment. You're not eradicating it, you're not defeating it, you're not ending it, but if you can, with all the elements that exist in the society, develop a strategy of containment, we'll be in a better place. And I would say, maybe somebody else would say, but not me, but I'm here and you're asking me. I think we were successful in the last 50 years of using the elements that were out there: civility, truth, memory of the Holocaust, coalitions, legislation, litigation, all the elements that made our society what it was, to keep anti-Semitism in the gutters with the cover on. And it worked in the sense, if you take a look at the last 100 years in the United States, from Leo Frank till Pittsburgh, 3 Jews were killed in the United States because they were Jews. In 100 years, millions were killed all over the world because they were Jews. And 2 out of the 3 were because of the Middle East, Meir Kahane and the yeshiva student David Halberstam. So it's really one classic case of anti-Semitism in Crown Heights. We broke all barriers: political, cultural, economic, you name it, academic, all these things that were barred to Jews because they were Jews didn't disappear, but they were not part of the American tradition. So if everything was so wonderful, what happened? Well, first of all, I need to say our warnings, and we issued reports every year. Nobody listened. And the people who should have listened, the media didn't listen, they didn't care. Okay, they had other reasons. But the people who should have listened, the Jews, ignored us, said we were creating these facts because we were fundraising. And, the barbs came more from the Jewish community than they came from the anti-Semites on the outside, who didn't take a warning series. And every year we said, hey, I'm going through my papers. I wrote about campus anti-Semitism in 1974, in 1979. We're talking about it's a new phenomenon. 20 years ago, I met with the president of Columbia because Jews and Israelis and Jews were being discriminated against in Columbia. So it's not new, but people didn't listen. Okay, so aside from that, what happened? What happened is the world changed. The world changed in the last 10 years. Trump is part of it. I would call it Trumpism. It's not Trump per se. I don't think he's such a chacham that he knows what he's doing. But he broke all taboos. Probably the most significant thing that he did to hurt us, and again, he didn't do it to hurt us, is to destroy truth. True anti-Semitism, racism is the big lie. Can you imagine if Goebbels were in this position that we're in? But he destroyed the truth. He destroyed media. These are elements that we used for the last 50, 100 years to fight anti-Semitism, to counteract it, to argue it, etc. So you lost civility, you lost all the taboos were gone. The taboos protected us as everybody else. We lost truth, we lost media, and we have the internet. We have a new phenomenon, which, as I would say here, if Goebbels had, probably could have conquered the world. Because now, all of a sudden, I remember I went to Palo Alto many, many times. I wrote a book 10, 15 years ago called Viral Hate. People didn't pay attention. But all of a sudden, the geniuses in Palo Alto created a super highway where misinformation and disinformation were easily transmitted in nanoseconds globally. And what's the number one hit on misinformation and disinformation? What are the conspiracy theories all about? Jews, Jews, Jews.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Mark Twain, 140, I don't remember, he wrote an essay about Jews and anti-Semitism, and he said wherever he went, there was anti-Semitism. Rich people, smart people, stupid people, atheists, religious. So part of the problem is that there is no one reason. Anti-Semitism serves the right and the left, fascism and communism. It serves the rich and the poor. It metastasizes. And therefore, we come to a realization that since there is no one reason and it serves so many purposes, it will always be with us. Mm-hmm. And the atmosphere totally changed. And that brings it to your question, what's the role of Jewish leadership? Okay. I thought in my time it was tough. Compared to what it is today, it was easy.
Okay, you said a lot of things, and I'm very persuaded by a lot of them, so I'm going to pick up on a few different pieces. One that you didn't name that I've been laser focused on for years now, and I wrote about this 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago about how I argued that hyperpartisanship in America was the biggest existential threat to Jews, because in some ways what you described as the container that made possible the suppression of remote radical ideas, conspiracy theories, the rupture of taboos, one of the other forces that it relied upon was broad consensus politics in America that sidelined marginal viewpoints. And both parties, by the way, have been complicit in this through the process of gerrymandering, where you make districts that are super red and super blue. And there was a powerful example of this recently with the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, one of the wildest stories that I feel like I've seen in a long time, where Republican members of Congress are insisting that an anti-Semitism bill focuses very heavily on anti-Israel activism because they see that as a left problem. And then, as part of the process, Marjorie Taylor Greene leads a process by which then they carve out an exception in the prohibitions on speech for Christ killing. Christians should be allowed to believe that without being accused of anti-Semitic. So I guess this is a long way of asking, I think, a complicated question, which is one of the taboos that I think held for a long time was that anti-Semitism was bad. Nobody wanted to be identified as it. Today, it's still the case. Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't want to be called an anti-Semite. Anti-Israel activists don't want to be characterized as anti-Semite. But in the landscape of language in which we're operating, it kind of doesn't matter anymore. So in what ways is the terminology of fighting anti-Semitism actually helping us or hurting us right now, as opposed to fighting a more generalized Jewish hate, which can take all these different kind of forms?
It dawns on me, I didn't mention the word Israel.
Yeah, we'll come to Israel for sure. Yeah.
And neither did you. And yet, when it comes to issues of definition, issues of bipartisanship, et cetera, Israel, pro-Israel, plays a major role in terms how we used to define anti-Semitism. We define it now, whether it becomes an issue of conflict. And what I would say, Israel has become the Jew amongst the nations. And so when every nation is allowed, the Jews not allowed, et cetera, and then it becomes. But I believe that in my years, the most sacred possession we thought we had developed was bipartisanship. Bipartisanship on race, on anti-Semitism, on Israel. I remember many years ago, we took missions to Israel of congressmen, Democrats and Republicans. Together, they discovered the Holy Land. They discovered Jesus on our shoulders in Israel. And they came back and for the first time worked with each other because they knew each other and liked each other. Okay? Then comes a period in our time, and, Sheldon Adelson Zichrona Livracha, and he decides, no, we're not going to have joint missions bipartisan. We'll only take Republicans. So the Democrats started taking Democrats and Republicans. We, ourselves destroyed bipartisanship. Israel made a decision somewhere along the line, and look, to a large extent, since Israel became part and parcel of our Jewishness and who we are and our role in America and our advocacy and our identity and everything else, the Zion that came out of Zion was not always for all of Zion. And so the message that's coming out is that Israel started becoming partisan. And we are today in a partisan situation where There are no coalitions, and every issue is being used against the others, and we're being used. Jews are being used on Israel, on anti-Semitism, for other purposes. And that puts us in a dilemma. If it was Jews quad Jews, it's one thing to stand up. But now, when Jews are being used on immigration issues, on woke issues, makes it a lot more difficult when to say something or not say something.
One of the forces that you just described in terms of Israel forcing this bipartisan divide is, I'm going to just say, honestly, this was a choice by the Netanyahu administration as well over the past 15, 20 years. There's good evidence that they became convinced that liberal Jews were disappearing. They became convinced that liberal Jews represent a infinitesimally small percentage of the population compared to evangelicals. If you don't really care about Jewish peoplehood and you care about the long-term survival of Israel on the basis of the choices of the right,
that they weren't supportive of Israel.
Why has that position, which is so obvious, why has that never been publicly articulated by leaderships of the major Jewish organizations who are constantly running protection for the Netanyahu administration because of the perception that that's the way that you are pro-Israel? Well, couldn't it have made a difference over the last 20 years for the AJC, for the ADL, for the federations to not just privately nudge against Netanyahu, but publicly say, we as representatives of the American Jewish community do not accept that this is an approach that attempts to speak in our name? Have we enabled this to happen?
Well, because they really did not speak in our name, okay? They represented their interests. And what you're seeing is again, you can dislike Bibi or like Bibi, it doesn't matter. But Bibi still articulates, first and foremost, what he believes as a democratically elected leader, what is in his mind, in his understanding, in the best interest of the people of Israel. So for us to second guess that, and you want us to second guess it, if you support Israel, and Israel is not at peace, and Mashiach hasn't come, and we haven't resolved. So the only issues that I remember we ever took on are the internal issues of respect amongst Jews. I've always said that support for Israel will not disappear on the issue of settlements, but it will disappear if Israel does not respect other Jews. How, that it starts defining Jews in one way. And so why should my children and grandchildren care about Israel in the future if half of them or 80% of them don't think they're Jews? So this is the only issue, Yehuda, that the Jewish community more spoke out, because who is a Jew and who's a rabbi determined in Israel impacted on us. The other issues, how to carry on diplomacy, foreign policy, it would really be chutzpahdik for us to substitute our wisdom to his wisdom. Now, the option that we had is not to follow. That means we didn't, he went into the Trump camp.
Yeah.
American Jewry is not following him into the Trump camp. Elements of American Jewry are, but they were there for other reasons as well. But again, it would be really chutzpahdik for me to substitute my opinion, my view of what is in the best interest of the lives and safety of Israeli citizens. And as long as they're a democracy, I said a while back during the judicial crisis reform, I was asked, I remember, by the Jerusalem Post, Abe, you've always said your support of Israel is unconditional. And I said, yeah, unconditional as long as Israel continues to be a democracy. And as long as Israel continues to be a democracy, whether I like Bibi or not, he's going to determine how to carry on his foreign policy. To what extent I support it publicly? Again, Israel is at war. Israel's still under threat. So these are not decisions that we're talking about in an abstract. And October 7th changed a lot of it. If we were moving Yehuda in your direction, where the American Jewish community was becoming more comfortable being critical, and it was, and then came October 7th, and you know what? Criticism is a luxury that Jews feel at this moment they don't have or have less of.
But I think I'm asking a slightly different question, which is not about kind of omnibus criticism of Israel's policies. And there, your mileage may vary. I'm more comfortable with it. You're less comfortable with it. I'm focusing on something more specific, which is public criticism of the decision by the Netanyahu government to participate in the partisan polarization in America, which is actually existentially damaging to American Jews. So the state of Israel makes as part of its core claim, right? It makes as part of its core claim that it is both a state for its citizens, like any normal state, but it also sees a responsibility to protect and defend the integrity of Jews around the world, and not just when they arrive. And my observation is that if you and I agree that this partisanship held together around a certain type of support for Israel, and that the Israeli government helped to pull that apart, we should actually be resisting that, which is not an internal Israel issue. It's an internal American Jewish issue.
Yeah, Yehuda, Schwarz sind Ayid. It's good to be Jewish, but it's tough to be Jewish. It's a great intellectual conversation, but I'm sorry, I know Israel talks on behalf of safety and well-being of Jews, but I know that first and foremost, it's the safety and security of the citizens of Israel. And in the last 50 years, Israel and I have privately disagreed, and I saw them taking positions which would be not positive for diaspora Jews. And again, I understood it, because if I had the responsibility for my citizens, I would take first and foremost. It's, lahavdil, in my area. To me, it was always, the halo concept, Ivena Nili Mili, but it was always number one. It was always clearly number one. And when you come to current leadership, Jewish leadership, it isn't always number one. They're a little befuddled where it should be, etc. But I always understood that for Israel and Israelis, their safety, their security, their relationship is number one. And I don't like Bibi's embrace of Trump saying he's the greatest president for Israel in history, and then Bibi saying yes. But you know what? I understand. And again here, a lot of people don't like Bibi. The fact is, October 7th, Hamas didn't attack Bibi, it attacked Israel. And it's easy to say, I don't like Bibi, so therefore this and therefore that. That's a luxury that I don't think we have, because the attack, they weren't going to destroy Bibi, they're going to destroy Israel. And so, again, we have certain luxuries here to discuss, and what could be and what should be. There's still a reality out there. Now, I will say to you this. People used to ask me, what keeps me up at night? And my answer used to be Iran, existential threat. Well, no, it doesn't keep me up anymore, because Israel today has a deterrent. It's destroyed Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. And Iran is not an existential threat. What is an existential threat? God forbid, deterioration of the relationship between Israel and America, and Israel and diaspora Jewry. That keeps me up, because we're in a situation where Israel is so dependent on the United States. And being so dependent on the United States, it is dependent on the American Jewish community. But Yehuda, what we saw this week, you have it dated in the program, all the efforts at lobbying, all the efforts at advocacy, all the relationships that we built within 24 hours are down the drain. And it really doesn't matter, because America has changed so dramatically. So again, the questions that you ask, my successors and the Jewish community, the decisions where they stand and where they don't stand, there's no precedent for it.
Yeah.
And the precedents that we look at in a world that it really doesn't fit. So I have, always intellectually, and I don't compare Has v'Chalila, Trump to Hitler or Hitler, okay? I don't. There are all kinds of elements that people like to. But I intellectually understood Hitler coming to power. Now I really understand it for the first time. I couldn't understand lawyers and doctors and jurists in the 30s these were people who saved lives, stood up for, and I now see it. I now understand how you can rationalize anything and everything. I'm a lawyer. My daughter's, I don't understand the lawyers, coming down on a knee and saying, Hashamnu, Chatanu, Bagatnu, we're guilty. How do we settle this? I could never understand it then, and now I understand. That's what's very frightening. I will tell you something else. You said I spoke out at the Holocaust Museum on Yom HaShoah.
Yeah.
The museum is there for one thing, to show never be silent, stand up. So if you don't do it there, but I have to tell you, how many people thank me for my courage? You know how many people have said to me, thank you for speaking up? If this is courage, oy va'avoy lanu. But there is an intimidation. There is a fear here, very, very deep.
I know.
That to me is very scary, because I look at my fellow Jews and Jewish institutions, and all of a sudden the Cheshbon HaNefesh is about them, not about Am Yisrael. It's are they going to be targeted? Okay, so maybe we should be quiet. We shouldn't be targeted. And I've said to people, if he decides to target you, it really doesn't matter what you say or don't say. So you might as well stand up and say what you believe. But it's easier for me because I don't have a constituency. I don't speak for anybody. But I will also tell you, my wife and my kids said to me, we understand you're going to go to the Holocaust Museum and you're going to be you. But you know what? Just think, okay. So I try to do it delicately. I try to do it edel. I try to do it with a context. But I understand the fear out there. I understand the anxiety out there, whether it's the Holocaust institution or tax deductibility. All of a sudden, if tax deductibility goes out the drain, most of the support for Jewish chinuch education disappears. So I understand, but still, we have responsibility.
Yeah. So look, I agree with you, and we've had, we're on nobody's radar, for better or worse, I guess. But we've had internal conversations about what our commitments are and what we'll be willing to do at the cost of donors, of tax status, all those things. And those are not small calculuses. We employ people. It's like a big deal to say we're willing to put it at risk because we believe that we have to say what we need to say. What scares me a little bit is not that people are holding their tongue because of fear. I get that. What scares me is that people are holding their tongue, claiming that it's about fear, but it's actually about self-interest, and claiming that they think that by holding where they are, they keep access. I mean, that's been such a big narrative for so long for American Jewish leaders. Well, I need to have access. But I feel like, well, what's the access for? You have access, say something now. And the fear of jeopardizing that access feels like, well, what's the point of having it if it's not for this kind of rise of authoritarianism? So how do you get people to move beyond that? And it can't be that people wait till they retire. It's not good.
I share with you, when Trump ran for office the first time, I went to a mentor. I went to see Henry Kissinger. And I said, Henry, what do we do? And he said to me, you know what you do. I protect democracy, you protect the Jews. So he worked with them, and I think Jews always felt you need to deal with the power to be, not the power to want to be.
Yeah.
But it is, listen, our relationships, sometimes holding our nose, save Jewish lives, and prevent the Jewish suffering. Listen, I went to see the junta in Argentina. Hello. Okay, was this something I wanted to do? No, because most of the students arrested were from social sciences, and they were Jews. They happened to be Jews. And Timmerman was suffering as a Jew, whether I liked his philosophy or not. So, I worked with Mengistu. I went to see Arafat. So we made these very uncomfortable decisions. That doesn't mean I was right all the time.
Right.
I worried about credibility. I worried, to me, it was the Cheshbon HaNefesh I had to give to myself. Okay. I think what was lucky for me is from whence I came. People say to me, "Oh, you survived, so you can do this." That's the height of arrogance and chutzpah.
Yeah.
God knows why. But it was simple for me because my focus was always clear. It was always clear. It's what serves best the Jews, the Jewish people in Israel. The answer isn't always clear. The answer is not always clear. After the Iran Revolution, I went to see Ramsey Clark in the Iranian embassy in Washington. Ramsey Clark, and people said to me, "What are you doing?" And Ramsey Clark saved 15 Jews from hanging because I went to see him. Now, and all kinds of people said, "Oh, what are you doing?" So it's not always simple. Now, you say, it's not fear, it's self-interest. Well, it's fear of what? It's fear that you're going to lose your position, you may lose whatever. So it's very mixed. What scares me is we can rationalize everything.
Yeah.
It's so easy to rationalize. And that's the scary part. At one moment, you stop rationalizing and say, this is way beyond the rational reason why I could or shouldn't do it. It takes a higher plane. And, I don't know the answer. I am worried because I don't see things changing for the better. I don't see light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see it in Israel. I don't see it here. And again, we're so tied to each other. All of a sudden, Bibi's now talking about we have to be independent.
Yeah.
Okay, a little late.
Yeah.
But because all of a sudden his relationship is souring. We don't always have the wisdom. And if we have the wisdom, then we need the courage. We don't always have the courage. I always worried about credibility. Credibility was the most important element in my possession on behalf of the Jewish people. Doesn't mean I made mistakes. But if the cheshbon hanefesh is not losing non-tax exemption, then I don't know. Yeah. But on the other hand, if your institution disappears, you're not there to help or do.
I felt that the piece that I felt was particularly courageous was speaking about the universities, because that feels like, to a lot of Jews right now, the situation at universities feels like red meat fight against anti-Semitism, the perception that these places, which I think is not fully accurate, that these places which have deep anti-Semitic ideas embedded in certain departments and certain culture around Israel, but are not, it's not... even like at the campus that we're next door to, there are Jewish students who are thriving on campus. So that narrative is serving a particular set of ideas that are actually not about anti-Semitism. It's actually also about dismantling universities. And you have tried to stand up against that and said, like...
I think we have an obligation. I said it almost colloquially. Jews have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I don't understand why. Thank you, Mr. President, for Jerusalem. No, thank you for banning Arabs. Thank you for what you're doing here, but no, thank you for immigration. Immigration is the soul of Jews. And many Jews died because there was no immigration to the United States. So we need to understand it. So we're not able to do this. Somehow we feel that if he does us a favor or somebody does us a favor, we have to close our eyes and mouth to everything else. And I think we need to be strong enough and mature enough to say thank you and no thank you. And we're not doing it. I don't understand why, because we're dealing with a persona who's vindictive, who took him 4 years to talk to Bibi because he congratulated Biden. All right, so you're dealing with a persona which breaks all the rules in terms of what we understood is behavior, civility. How do you protect your interests? How do you act? How do you behave? But still, our code is still our code, and our code is yes, thank you. We should thank for what's good, but we should have the ability and the strength to say, but no, this is not about immigration. Immigration is what America is about. Due process is what America is about. But look, whatever you want, his message on anti-Semitism is a good message. The trouble in this country is there are no consequences to anti-Semitism. That's what's happened. People used to say to me, what's the difference between anti-Semitism in the U.S. and Europe? And I would say in Europe, there are laws against anti-Semitism, but they're not enforced. In the United States, the First Amendment won't let us have laws against anti-Semitism, but there are consequences. If you're an anti-Semite, it's un-American, it's immoral, it's a Christian, you're going to pay a price, not because the law says so. Now, we've lost that in the last 10 years. There are no consequences to, you, as I don't tell you, you can go up, you can march with a Palestinian flag from today to tomorrow. God bless you. That's fine. But if you use that flag to stop a Jewish students to go to class or beat them up on it, that's not freedom of speech. There needs to be consequences. And we all know that if students use the N-word in a public square of a university, they would be suspended. But to say gas to Jews today is okay. So there needs to be consequences. The irony is Biden wrote the book. He did the initiative on anti-Semitism, which is historic. In 50 years, we would knock on the door of the government and say, hey, anti-Semitism is your responsibility. We finally have it. But they didn't act. They didn't act because of elections, because of Michigan, because of Israel. Trump is saying all the right things, and he may even be doing the right things, but for the wrong reasons. So it's a dilemma for us, but I think we still have to stand up for the institutions, for due process, even if the wrong things that he's doing help us in the long term.
I just don't see how they help us at all, because I think in the long run,
there needs to be consequences.
Yes, for sure. No, I felt this way. I felt this way all along at the universities, that the issue was time, place, and manner. If you violate the rules, prosecute the rules.
No, but how do you get them to? The codes were always there. If they applied the codes, there would be consequence. The problem is they didn't apply the codes to us.
I agree, so, but that could have easily happened through actual intelligent mobilizing of the Jewish community. But when you connect it to cutting $850 million from Johns Hopkins from cancer research, and then pretend that that's what's happening at Harvard or Columbia, that's making them enforce the rules, doesn't make any sense. That's actually dismantling higher education.
But I think the minority of Jews support that. I think the minority of Jews support that. They're happy to hear the language. They're happy that there's going to be a price to be paid, but that's not the price, because that's going to destroy. Listen, I also worry. We're putting out these reports on anti-Semitism, ABC for university. I want kids to go to Columbia. I want Jewish kids to go to Harvard. We worked for 50 years to break the quotas for us, because that's where the future of America will continue to be. 100%. I don't want them not to go. So, I'm very careful about being critical of my successors, because what happens is it becomes a very personal type of thing. Yeah. Just my generation, the current generation. But I do think there is something missing. In my day, and I remember even when I was at Tzutzik growing up, I would go ADL, American Jewish Committee, American Jewish Congress, NJCRC, anywhere from 5 to 10 organizations would meet at Leo's restaurant on East 70th once a month. We hated each other's guts. We competed for the same dollar, but we sat once a month and we struggled about the priority. And then we would say, you know what? Arab boycott is an issue for the next year. We need legislation. You, ADL, and the American Jewish Congress take the lead. Immigration is going to be an issue. You, the American Jewish Committee, and you, Hadassah, and you, Hillel, you take the lead. And we all did the same things. We all fought for Israel, better or worse. We all fought anti-Semitism. We all did interreligious. But we did set priorities. And when there was a time to set up an organization on Soviet Jewry, we did. And there was a time to set up an organization for Ethiopian Jewry, we did. And there was a time to deal with the Catholic Church as a community. It was Ichkik. So we did operate. I don't see it now. I don't feel it now. I don't see this effort of coming together seriously. Because how many reports on anti-Semitism do we need? Does it really matter whether it's 62% or 67%? So for the Goyim, it's, yay, take a look. Everybody hates the Jews. And for the Jews, well, what does that do? Does that reinforce our strength?
Right.
So nobody's sitting there saying, you know what, ADL, you're good at this. You did this committee. They're not doing it. Plus, I will tell you, we need to have a Jewish position in immigration.
Yeah.
We need to have a Jewish position on higher education. We need to have a Jewish position. In 20 years from now, this will be a Latino Hispanic country. We need a strategy to interact with the future Latinos and Hispanic leadership together. We need to be there on their way up. So there are things we can do. This will pass. I think it will be better. It will never be the same. It will never be the same. But Yehuda, I'm an optimist. Golda Meir once said Jews don't have the luxury to be pessimists. I don't think survivor. 1.5 million Jewish children perished. I survived. How dare I not have an optimistic view of our future? It's going to be tough. It was worse. But it's all about us. People say to me, well, I said, you know what? I'm an optimist because it's not about them. It's about us.
Yeah.
Because I once went to a seminar, Whether Jewish Civilization Will Survive. And the organizers had a study of Spengler and Toynbee to try to find the secret of Jewish survival. And I think they found it. And they came out and they said, after the Roman Empire fell, no Roman got up and said, I want to be a Roman. How do I become a Roman? After the Greek civilization fell, no Greeks came running. I want to be a Greek. The secret of Jewish survival is after the destruction of the first temple and the exile and the second temple. Jews were running around. How do I continue being Jewish? Maybe we'll write a Talmud. Maybe we'll do, whatever. We were being Jew. And if after the Shoah, I said to my father, why are you teaching me to be Jewish? Okay. Why are you sending me to yeshiva? Okay. So he explained it. We have a tradition, we have a history, blah, blah, whatever. When Jews stood up, built families, rebuilt Israel and Jewish sovereignty. So I look at that. Now, so far, I think we've done okay after October 7th. With all the issues, the question is going to be how many Jews take off mezuzahs from the door. That to me, and as long as Jews get up there and say, I want to be a Jew, we will continue to survive and overcome all our enemies. But that's, so far, Jews returning to synagogue, I don't know how many billions they made for Israel. So far, the signs are good.
Yeah.
And you have to be seichel. I don't think it's a heroism to go to Colombia and wear a T-shirt, Tzahal. Okay, that's a little stupid at this moment.
Yeah.
Doesn't show heroism unless you want an incident. And there are some people who like incidents. That's not courage. That's not standing up for being a Jew. But so far, I see the Jews standing up. I worry about Israel. I worry because the internal strife, we overcame it 2 years ago on October 8th. But I have this gnawing feeling we're going back to Milchamot HaYehudim.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scary part. So again, it's not about them, it's about us. And so that's why you're in business.
Yeah, no kidding. Well,
Hartman,
before I know, and I'm grateful for the plug, but I'll ask you one last question. And it really is like raising the ante. To me, it's not just sufficient to have a strategy about immigration. I really feel that the role of those of us who fight anti-Semitism, who fight hate, have a special responsibility to look out for the vulnerability of others. And here I feel that since your tenure, this has gone away. I remember growing up, when I was in a Jewish day school, Orthodox day school, but the place where I encountered real, serious understanding of racism and hate in America was when I did an after-school ADL program. That's where ADL introduced me, not to how do I stand up for myself, how do I advocate for myself. That I got from my day school. What it taught me was, what country do you live in, and how is immigration of value, and how is fighting racism of value, and what is the multicultural tapestry of this country that we're responsible to. And I have to say, that's gone away. It's entirely been replaced by, if you are fighting anti-Semitism, if you're opposing hate, you're opposing this hate. And now we're going to jeopardize our relationship with the Black community and with immigration advocacy groups because we're just standing up for ourselves. It's just a melee moment. It's who's for me. How does the Jewish community reclaim that the nobility of fighting anti-Semitism is intertwined with the nobility of fighting against hatred to all, that we are intertwined with these commitments?
Well, okay, so it's part of our teachings. It's part of Tzedek Terdof is not about us. It's about everybody, okay? So we've always been taught. I remember, we did the first book, The Nation of Immigrants. We did World of Difference, okay, all that. But part of the reality, Yehuda, is that October 7th was a major trauma. People asked me after October 7th, Abe, were you surprised? And my short answer was no. I wasn't surprised, but I was shocked. I was shocked at two things. One was the depth of the hate that was out there, and two, the silence and indifference of all the people that we stood with together. I never believed, Yehuda, when I worked for LGBT or African, it was always for me. It was always because to my values. If I raised the level of respect and tolerance for anybody, it raises the level of tolerance and respect for us. So even in that, it wasn't altruistic. It was selfish as well. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 helped us open up resorts for Jews, because all of a sudden you couldn't discriminate in interstate commerce. Okay, it was done for African Americans, but all of a sudden Palm Beach opened up for Jews because we sued the breakers under the Civil Rights. So I never spoke out. We never embraced because there's going to be a return. Okay, because we did it again for us, for our values, etc. But I think the trauma of October 7th is so deep still. You can't put on the fingers of both hands 10 organizations that stood up. You can't. And that's for the NAACP, which has no international agenda, to come out with a resolution against arms to Israel in this period. And it becomes hard, to embrace. So we're in a period now whereas the first part of Hillel is going to be a lot more impactful than the second. But again, I believe that the second part is not for anybody else but for us as well. We need to educate. The problem is most Jews don't understand Jewish values, okay? And so that's another problem. That's another. They don't even know what they're doing and why they're doing it. If they only knew, maybe they would embrace it a little bit more. But you're absolutely right. Am levadav nishkan is not. We can't live alone. We can't. Yeah. And we know that Israel certainly can't, and we can't, and we can't. And the problem, a lot of problems of what happened in the Holocaust. But the Holocaust would not have happened if only Germans did it. If it wasn't for the Ukrainians and Lithuanians and the Latvians, and that's who did it. So, it does matter who we're with. My nanny, she stood up. For her, this was the right thing to do. And that's what we're teaching. It's the right thing to do. To stand up for others is the right thing to do. So, you know what? Immigration, it's going to hurt us too eventually.
Of course it will.
Education is already hurting us. So, I think it's selfish and altruistic at the same time. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't throw it away because at the end of the day, we will be alone and we can survive alone.
Can't thank you enough for doing the show today, Abe. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Here are some other things that are happening at the Shalom Hartman Institute. With Israeli elections on the horizon, the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem convenes senior political leaders and experts, including Yair Lapid, Avigdor Lieberman, and Yair Golan, to explore the challenges facing Israel at the intersection of Judaism and democracy and the possibilities of building a new coalition. You can listen to the full conference at the link in the show notes. In Washington, D.C., Rachel Jacoby Rosenfield moderated a conversation between Hartman's vice president and director of the Center for Shared Society, Rana Fahum, and Hartman's senior faculty member, Masua Sagiv. They explored what kinds of political imagination, courage, and partnership are needed to keep building a different kind of Israel. Learn more about the Center for Shared Society at the link in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to our show, and special thanks to our guest this week, Abe Foxman. Identity Crisis is produced by me, Tessa Zitter, and our executive producer is Maytal Friedman. This episode was produced with assistance from Annie Beyer-Chaffetz, researched by Gabrielle Feinstone, and edited by Gareth Hobbs at Silversound NYC, with music provided by SoCalled. Transcripts of our show are now available on our website, typically a week after an episode airs. We're always looking for ideas for what we should cover in future episodes, so if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you have comments about this episode, please write to us at identitycrisis@shalomhartman.org. For more ideas from the Shalom Hartman Institute about what's unfolding right now, sign up for our newsletter in the show notes and subscribe to this podcast everywhere podcasts are available. See you next time, and thanks for listening.